Please, I haven't eaten since yesterday. Just a little bread. The woman's voice barely carried over the traffic. She stood on the corner in torn gray clothes, her hair tangled, an old backpack clutched to her chest. Most people walked past, without looking. Then, three well-dressed strangers stopped. A young woman in designer sunglasses tilted her head. Is that really you? The woman on the sidewalk lowered her eyes. The second one laughed. I don't believe it. So this is where life brought you, the man said, arms folded. I'm only asking for something to eat, she said quietly. You used to look right through people like us, the first woman said. Please, just some bread. The man smirked. Looks like you're finally getting a taste of real life. The second woman reached into her handbag. For a second, something like hope crossed the homeless woman's face. She pulled out her car keys instead. Let's go. We're wasting time. They walked off laughing quietly. The woman didn't call after them. She just looked down at the sidewalk. A few minutes later, Daniel Reeves came down the same street with his 8-year-old daughter Nora, carrying grocery bags. Dad, Nora pointed. Daniel looked up and saw the woman standing alone. As they got closer, she lifted her head. Their eyes met. Sir, she said, I don't need money, but could you spare some food? Daniel looked at the bag in his hand, then walked into the bakery beside them without a word. He came back with a warm sandwich, 2 rolls, a bottle of water, an apple, and placed them in her hands. She stared at the food like she didn't believe it was real. Thank you. She held the sandwich tight, then looked back up at him. There's one more thing. Her voice cracked. I don't have anywhere to sleep tonight. If you have a garage, a porch, anywhere dry, I'll be gone first thing in the morning. Daniel's smile faded. He glanced at Nora, then back at her. I'm sorry, he said. I have a little girl. I can't bring someone I don't know into my home. He hated the words as soon as they left his mouth. She nodded quickly. I understand. You've already done more than enough. Daniel stood there a second longer, wanting to say something else. Instead, he took Nora's hand. Come on, sweetheart. Nora kept looking back as they walked away. The woman sat down on a bench and didn't touch the sandwich. She just held it against her chest. Neither of them spoke in the truck for a while. Then Nora broke the silence. Daddy? Yeah. We still have the guest room. Daniel kept his eyes on the road. I know. Then why couldn't she stay there? It's not that simple. Because she's homeless? No. Because she's a stranger? Nora looked out the window. What if Mommy was the stranger? Daniel's hands tightened on the wheel. He didn't answer. That night, after Nora fell asleep hugging her teddy bear, Daniel stood in the living room and looked out the window. Lightning cracked. Thunder rolled through the neighborhood. Then started coming down hard. All he could see was a woman on a cold bench, holding a sandwich she hadn't eaten. What if Mommy was the stranger? He closed his eyes, then grabbed his keys. The wipers fought the rain the whole drive downtown. You'd better still be there, he muttered, pulling up to the corner where he'd left her. She was gone. Daniel found her 20 minutes later, huddled inside the doorway of an abandoned bus terminal, soaked through, shaking too hard to speak. Come on, he said. Just for tonight. She didn't argue. She didn't have the strength to. Back at the house, he gave her a towel and one of his late wife's old sweaters, the only one he hadn't been able to give away. Nora watched from the hallway in her pajamas, quiet taking in every detail like she was memorizing it. What's your name? Nora finally asked. Grace, the woman said, and even that seemed to cost her something. Daniel set her up in the guest room and told her to lock the door if it made her feel safer. She looked at him like nobody had said something like that to her in a long time. Why are you doing this? She asked. You don't know me. My daughter asked me a question in the truck tonight, he said. I didn't have a good answer. For her. Grace didn't ask what the question was. She just nodded like she understood it anyway. The next morning, Daniel got up early for work and found the guest room empty. The bed was made. The sweater was folded on the pillow. Grace was gone, and so was half a loaf of bread. From the kitchen counter, he told himself it made sense. She was a stranger. She owed him nothing, and he'd made clear from the start this wasn't permanent. Still, something about it sat wrong with him all day, a feeling he couldn't name. 2 days later, on his way back from the hardware store, he saw her again 3 blocks from the terminal, crouched next to an older man wrapped in a blanket against the wind. She was handing him something wrapped in a napkin. Daniel slowed the truck and watched. It was the bread. All of it. She hadn't kept a single piece for herself. He sat there a long moment before he found the courage to roll down the window. "You gave it away," he said. Grace looked up, startled to see him. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. "I only needed one night's worth. You could have told me that." "You already did enough for me," she said. "I wasn't going to ask for more." Daniel didn't have a response to that. He just watched her help the older man to his feet and walk him toward a shelter down the block, refusing a ride, refusing anything more from him. That night, he mentioned her to his neighbor, Walt, an older man who'd lived on the street for 30 years and considered himself an authority on everything happening within a 5-block radius. Chestnut hair, gray coat, showed up outside the terminal a few months back. Walt said, leaning on his fence, "There's something off about her. Keeps to herself. Won't take money from anybody, not even the church people. And twice now I've seen a black SUV parked near where she sleeps, just sitting there. Nobody gets out." Daniel frowned. "Watching her, looking for her, if you ask me," Walt said. "You want my advice?" Daniel, a woman running from something dressed like she's got nothing, usually isn't running from nothing. Daniel laughed it off at the time. He had no idea how right Walt was. 3 days passed before Daniel saw her again, and this time it was because she came, looking for him. She was waiting near the hardware store when his shift ended, standing off to the side like she wasn't sure she had the right to be there at all. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to say no if you have to." Daniel waited. "There's a storage locker across town. Everything I own that matters is in it, and I haven't been able to get to it because the two people who might be looking for me know exactly where it is." She said it fast, like she'd practiced it and still didn't like how it sounded. "I don't have anyone else to ask." "Who's looking for you, Grace?" She hesitated long enough that he almost regretted asking. "People who think they know what's best for me. It's complicated, and I know that's not an answer, but it's the truest one I can give you right now." Every instinct told him to say no. He had a daughter at home, a job, a life that didn't have room in it for someone else's trouble. But he thought about the bread she'd given away, about a woman with nothing who still found a way to think of someone else first. "I'll drive you," he said. "That's it. I'm not getting involved in whatever this is. That's all I'm asking." The locker turned out to hold almost nothing. A duffel bag, a manila envelope she tucked inside her coat before he could see what was in it, and a photograph she held on so tightly. Her knuckles went white. Daniel didn't ask. Some things people needed to protect on their own terms. On the drive back, a black SUV pulled alongside them at a red light. Grace went rigid. "Drive," she said quietly. "Please, just drive." Daniel didn't ask questions. He took the next turn, then another, doubling back through side streets until the SUV was gone. His hands were tight on the wheel, adrenaline he didn't fully understand running through him. "You want to tell me what that was?" he said once they'd put distance between themselves. "In the intersection." Grace was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window. 6 months ago, I made a decision that a lot of powerful people didn't agree with," she said. "They've been trying to bring me back ever since. I'm not in danger, not the way you're thinking, but I'm not ready to go back yet. Not until I know something for certain." "Know what?" She looked at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, something in her expression looked almost afraid to answer honestly. Whether it was ever really me people cared about, or just what I had. Daniel didn't understand it. Not yet, but something about the way she said it told him this. Wasn't the story of a woman running from a bad situation. This was a woman testing something, and he had just, without knowing it, become part of the test. He dropped her 3 blocks from the terminal, at her request, so nobody would see where she really slept. "Thank you," she said before getting out, "for not asking more than I could give you." "Grace." He caught her before she closed the door. "Whatever this is, If it gets worse, you know where I live. She looked at him a long moment, like she was memorizing that too. I know, she said. That's what worries me. 2 weeks passed, and Grace became something like a fixture at the edges of Daniel's life. Close enough to worry about, far enough that he told himself it wasn't his business. She wouldn't take money. She wouldn't take a permanent place to stay. But she started showing up, walking Nora partway home from the bus stop when Daniel was stuck at work, sitting with her at the kitchen table, helping with homework while Daniel cooked, always leaving before it got too late, always glancing at the windows like she was counting exits. Nora adored her. That was the part Daniel hadn't planned for. Grace knows the capital of every country, Nora announced one night. Even the small ones. Does she? Daniel said, watching Grace carefully from across the room. She's really smart, Dad. Smarter than my teacher. Grace caught his eye and looked away first. He started noticing things he'd missed before. The way she spoke sometimes, careful and precise, like someone used to choosing every word for a room full of people who'd repeat it. The way she flinched at loud engines. The way she once corrected a cashier's math before. The cashier had finished doing it, then looked embarrassed, like she'd revealed something she hadn't meant to. The black SUV came back twice more. Once parked outside the terminal at night, engine idling for almost an hour. Once, worse, parked down the street from Daniel's own house. That was the night he finally pushed. They know where I live now, he said. You need to tell me what's actually going on, Grace. Not the version you think I can handle. All of it. She sat at his kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug she wasn't drinking. If I tell you, I need you to understand something first. Nothing about how I've treated you or Nora has been a lie. That part was real. All of it. You're scaring me before you've even said anything. I know. She took a breath. There's a man named Charles Whitmore. He's been part of my life a long time, my father's business partner, and after my father died, the person everyone assumed would speak for me. He's been managing more than he should have for longer than I realized. 6 months ago, I found out exactly how much, and I made a decision that put both of us on a collision course. He's the one having me followed. He's not going to stop until he finds me. And when he does, he's going to want people to believe I was never fit to make decisions in the first place, that I ran because I was unstable, not because I found out what he'd been doing. Daniel sat back slowly. What did he do? He's been moving money that isn't his to move, she said, positioning himself to take permanent control of something that isn't his either. And the only way he gets away with it is if I don't come back, or if I come back looking exactly like the story he's already telling about me. So come back. Fight him with proof, with lawyers, whatever people like that fight with. Grace's laugh had no humor in it. It's not that simple. I don't have proof yet. I have suspicion. In a storage locker full of documents I haven't finished going through because for 6 months the only thing I've let myself think about was whether anyone out here would still help me if I had nothing to offer them. She looked at him. You did. Every single time. Without knowing why, without asking for anything back. Grace, what exactly is it that Whitmore thinks you have that's worth all this? She was quiet a long time, long enough that Daniel understood the answer was bigger than he'd let himself imagine. More than you'd believe, she finally said. And I need 1 more week before I'm ready for you to know how much. 1 week became 5 days. Daniel came home from a double shift to find Nora at the kitchen table, wide-eyed, a laptop open in front of her that wasn't his. Dad, look, she said. It's Grace. He almost told her to close it, some instinct telling him this wasn't his to see. Then he looked at the screen. It was a news article, 6 months old. A photograph of a woman in a tailored suit, hair pulled back, standing at a podium in front of a company logo Daniel recognized from half the devices. In his own house. The headline read, Grace Ashford, CEO of Ashford Technologies, missing 6 months. Board cites personal leave. Sources suggest otherwise. Daniel stared at the photograph. Same eyes. Same face, just cleaner, sharper, dressed in a Life that had nothing in common with torn gray clothes and a bench outside a bus terminal. That's her, right? Nora said. That's Grace. Daniel didn't answer. He was scrolling, reading fast. Net worth estimated in excess of $40 billion. Inherited controlling stake at 26 after her father's death. Board. Increasingly concerned about her prolonged absence, Charles Whitmore, acting on her behalf in her absence, has petitioned to formalize his role as controlling executive. $40 billion. He read the number 3 times like it might change. Every moment of the last month rearranged itself in his head. The way she spoke, the black SUVs, the manila envelope she wouldn't let him see, the way she'd looked at him that first night at the terminal like she'd forgotten what it felt like to be offered something with no strings on it. She'd sat at his table. She'd helped his daughter with homework. She'd slept in his guest room under a stranger's borrowed sweater. And the entire time, she was one of the wealthiest people on the planet, choosing to have nothing. He didn't know whether to feel angry or like he'd been part of something he didn't understand. Yet, Grace showed up an hour later like she did most evenings, and the second she saw his face in the doorway, she knew. You found out, she said quietly. $40 billion, Grace. His voice was flatter than he meant it to be. I gave you a sandwich. That sandwich meant more to me than anything anyone's given me in years. She stood on the porch, not stepping inside, like she understood she hadn't been invited this time. I know how it looks. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I've been part of some experiment for a month, like Nora has. It was never that. Not once it became about you and her. Her voice cracked in a way he hadn't heard before, not even the night of the storm. I disappeared because I stopped being able to tell who actually saw me and who saw what I could give them. Everyone in my life had a reason to be there that had nothing to do with me. I needed to know if that was the only reason anyone ever would be. And you turned me down the first night, she said. You had every reason to let me in, and you didn't because you were protecting your daughter, and I respected that more than anything Charles Whitmore has ever said to my face. Then you came back for me in a storm, with nothing to gain. That's not an experiment, Daniel. That's the only real thing that's happened to me in years. Daniel stood in the doorway, one hand still on the frame, torn between the instinct to shut the door and the pull to hear the rest of it. There's more, Grace said, and you're not going to like it. Before he could ask what, headlights swept across the front of the house. A black SUV pulled to the curb, and this time, someone got out. The man who stepped out of the SUV was in his 60s, silver-haired, dressed like he'd never once in his life stood on a sidewalk asking for anything. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. Grace. His voice carried the kind of calm that came from decades of being obeyed. You've had your 6 months. It's time to come home. Grace didn't move from the porch. Charles, this isn't the place for this conversation. No, he agreed, glancing past her at Daniel, at the modest house, at all of it with an expression that made Daniel's jaw tighten. It really isn't, which is exactly my point. He looked at Daniel directly for the first time. I'm sure whatever she's told you has been very moving. Grace has always had a gift for making people feel chosen. Is why the board is so concerned. A woman making decisions based on feeling instead of fact is a woman who shouldn't be making decisions at all. She's not incapable of anything, Daniel said. She's the only person who's told me the truth about any of this. Has she? Whitmore's smile didn't reach his eyes. Did she mention that in the last 6 months, 3 separate psychiatric consultations have been requested on her behalf? That the board has documentation going back over a year raising concerns about erratic decision-making? Or is that not part of the version of the story you've been given? Daniel looked at Grace. For the first time since he'd known her, she didn't have an answer. Ready. Those consultations were requested by you, she said finally, quiet but steady. Because I started asking questions about the Holloway acquisition 6 months before I left. Questions you didn't want answered. Questions born from paranoia, grace, which is precisely the pattern we've dash. I have the transfer records, Charles. Her voice didn't rise, but something in it went hard as stone. I have them in a storage locker 3 miles from here, and in 5 days, when I'm ready, I'm going to walk into that boardroom and put every one of them on the table. Whitmore's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. You have 5 days to reconsider whose narrative the board is going to believe, he said. A missing heiress living on the street, unreachable for 6 months, refusing medical evaluation. Or a man who spent 30 years keeping that company solvent while she indulged. Whatever this was, he gestured almost lazily at the house, at Daniel, at all of it like it was beneath discussion. I'd think carefully about which story sounds more like the truth to 12 strangers on a board. He got back in the SUV without waiting for a response. It pulled away slow, unhurried the way people move when they already believe they've won. Grace stood on the porch for a long moment after the taillights disappeared, and when she finally turned around, something in her had cracked open. He's going to get there first, she said. He's going to make sure the board believes I'm unfit before I ever get a chance to prove what he did. And the only proof I have is sitting in a storage locker that he now knows I've used, which means he'll have someone watching it by morning. Then get it tonight. I can't go near it. Not now. Not if he's watching. She sat down hard on the porch step, and, for the first time since Daniel had met her, dressed, fed, warm, safe under any measure that mattered, she looked exactly like the woman he'd found soaked and shaking outside a bus terminal. I gave up everything to find out if kindness without an angle still existed. I found it, and I might lose the company my father built anyway, because I spent 6 months looking for the answer to the wrong question. Daniel sat down beside her. Inside the house, he could hear Nora moving around upstairs, unaware how close all of this had just come to their front door. What's in the locker? He said. Besides documents? Grace turned to look at him, and something in her face shifted, like she was deciding whether he'd already given enough or whether she had the right to ask for anything more. A recorder, she said. Charles doesn't know I was in the room for the conversation where he first proposed the acquisition to the board behind my back. He thinks nobody was listening. I was. The next morning, Daniel drove to work and couldn't stop thinking about the look on Grace's face on the porch. Not fear exactly, but something close to defeat from a woman who'd survived 6 months on the street without ever once looking that way. He kept coming back to one thing. Whitmore was watching the locker. He wasn't watching Daniel. At lunch, he called in a favor from Ray, an old friend from high school who now ran a small security company doing exactly the kind of unglamorous work nobody thought to notice. Moving vans, storage transfers, deliveries. By the time his shift ended, Daniel had a plan he wasn't fully sure of and a decision he'd already made. He found Grace exactly where Walt had told him she'd be, near the terminal, sitting with her, back against the wall, staring at nothing. I can get the recorder, he said. Not you. Me. Whitmore's people are watching for you, not for some guy in a hardware store, apron, driving a work truck. Daniel, if he catches you, dash. He's not going to catch me. I'm not important enough for him to be watching. He crouched in front of her. You spent 6 months finding out whether people would help you without knowing who you were. I already know who you are now. I'm still here. Something in her face broke, quiet and unguarded, like she hadn't let herself hope for that sentence. Why, she said, would you put yourself anywhere near this? You have a daughter. You have a life you've worked hard to keep steady. Because Nora asked me a question in the truck a month ago, I still don't have a real answer. For, Daniel said, and because you gave away your only meal to a stranger the first night I met you, and I've been trying to figure out ever since how somebody does that and still gets called unfit by people who've never given anything away in their lives. Grace stood, and for the first time, Daniel saw something in her that wasn't caution or exhaustion. It was resolve. There's a woman named Priya Malhotra on the board, she said. She's the only one who never stopped taking my calls, even after I disappeared. If we can get her the recording and the transfer documents before the emergency session Whitmore's clearly about to call, she can slow this down long enough for it to matter. Then that's what we do. That night, Ray's crew moved a delivery van in and out of the storage facility without drawing a second glance. One crate among a dozen others, the manila envelope and an old digital recorder tucked inside a box marked kitchenware. Daniel picked it up 2 streets over hands, shaking more than he expected for something so ordinary. Grace listened to the recording once, sitting in Daniel's truck at 2 a.m., headphones pressed to her ears, tears sliding down her face without her seeming to notice them. "That's him," she said. "That's Charles, telling the board he had my verbal authorization for the acquisition. I never gave it. It's all there." "Then send it," Daniel said. "Tonight." Grace looked at him, at the truck, at the quiet street outside his house where this whole thing had started with a sandwich and a woman who wouldn't meet his eyes. "Not yet," she said. "If I send it from hiding, it looks like something I'm doing out of fear. I need to walk into that boardroom myself. I need them to see exactly who's been telling the truth this whole time, and exactly who's been lying to their faces for 6 months. She turned to Daniel, steadier now than he'd ever seen her. "Will you come with me?" The boardroom was on the top floor of a building Daniel had walked past 100 times, without ever once looking up. Grace had asked him to be there, not in the room, but close, in case things went the way she feared they might. She walked in wearing a plain gray coat that Daniel recognized, the same one she'd been wearing the night he first offered her a sandwich. Not a suit, not armor, just herself. The room went silent when she entered. 12 board members, and, at the head of the table, Charles Whitmore, already mid-sentence about concerning patterns of instability that died on his lips the moment he saw her. "Grace," he said, recovering fast, reaching for warmth that didn't reach his eyes. "We're relieved to see you well. The board has been deeply worried." "I'm sure you have been," Grace said, and set a small recorder on the table. A woman near the far end of the table leaned forward. "Priya Malhotra, the one board member who'd never stopped believing there was more to the story. Grace, we've heard a great deal from Charles about your state of mind these past months. We'd like to hear from you." "You will," Grace said. "But first, I'd like you to hear from him." She pressed play. Charles Whitmore's own voice filled the room, calm and confident, 6 months younger, telling the board that Grace had given him verbal authorization for the Holloway acquisition before her departure. The same claim, word for word, that he'd been repeating for months as fact. Grace let it play for exactly 10 seconds before she spoke over it. "I never gave that authorization. I was in the next room when he made that call because I'd started to suspect something wasn't right, and I wanted to hear how he talked about me when he thought I wasn't listening." She set a folder on the table. "These are the transfer records. Every one of them, cross-referenced with dates. I was verifiably absent from every decision he attributes to me. I didn't disappear because I was unstable. I disappeared because I found out my father's company was being taken apart by the one person he trusted to protect it, and I needed proof before I came back and said so in front of all of you." The room had gone completely still. Whitmore's face had lost its practiced calm. "This is exactly the kind of erratic behavior I've been describing," he said too fast. "Disappearing for months, living God knows where, and now presenting fragments of audio as though dash. I was living on the street, Charles," Grace said, and something in her voice made even the board members who doubted her sit up straighter. "For 6 months, because I needed to find out whether anyone in my life valued me for anything other than what I could give them. You called me unstable in this room for months. I'd like to introduce you to the reason I. No, I'm not." She looked toward the door, where Daniel stood waiting, exactly where she'd asked him to. "This man," she said, "found me outside a bus terminal in a storm and gave me the only warm meal I'd had in 3 days. He didn't know my name. He didn't know what I was worth. He said no the first time I asked to stay in his home because he was protecting his daughter And then he drove back through that same storm an hour later because he couldn't stop thinking about whether I was safe. He has asked me for nothing since. Not money, not favors, not even an explanation until I was ready to give one. She turned back to the board. That is the difference between the man sitting at the head of this table and the one standing at the back of it. One of them has spent 30 years positioning himself to take what wasn't his. The other. One gave a stranger a sandwich and never once asked what it would cost him. Priya Malhotra was the first to speak. I'd like a full forensic review of the Holloway transfers, effective immediately. And I'd like Mr. Whitmore's authority over company accounts, suspended pending that review. The motion carried. Whitmore stood, said something about legal counsel and misrepresentation, and was escorted out by building security before he finished the sentence. Grace didn't watch him go. She was looking at Daniel, standing at the back of a room he never imagined he'd be in, and for the first time in 6 months, she looked like someone who'd finally gotten the answer she'd given up everything to find. The investigation took 3 weeks to confirm everything Grace already knew. Charles Whitmore was formally removed from the company, and the board reinstated her as CEO, unanimously, this time with a level of respect that had nothing to do with her name and everything to do with what she'd walked through to prove herself right. She didn't disappear back into that life right away. For a few days, she still showed up at Daniel's house in the evenings, sat at the same kitchen table, helped Nora with the same homework, like the $40 billion hadn't changed the only part of the last month that had ever mattered to her. You could stop coming around, you know, Daniel told her one evening, only half joking. Nobody would blame you. I know, Grace said. That's exactly why I keep coming back. 2 weeks later, she showed up at the house in the middle of the day, dressed the way Daniel had only ever seen in that photograph, tailored, composed, unmistakably the woman, whose name was on the side of half the technology in his living room. She held a folder in her hands. I don't want you to think this is payment, she said, before he could even ask. What you did wasn't a transaction, and I'm not going to treat it like one. But I've set up an education trust for Nora. Full tuition, any school she wants, for as long as she wants to keep learning. It's not from a company. It's from me. Daniel started to protest, and Grace held up a hand. You gave me a sandwich when you had every reason not to, she said. You said no once, because you were protecting her, and I've never respected anyone more for saying it. Let me do this one thing for both of you. Not because you saved my company, because you reminded me what it feels like to be seen as a person instead of a signature. Nora, listening from the doorway, ran and hugged Grace before Daniel could say another word. Does this mean you're not disappearing again? Nora asked. Grace crouched down to her level, the way she had that very first night at the kitchen table, correcting homework in a stranger's borrowed sweater. No, she said. I already found what I was looking for. Daniel stood in his kitchen, in the same house where a homeless woman had once slept in his guest room for one night, and thought about how close he'd come to closing the door on all of it. One decision, made in a storm, because his daughter had asked him a question he didn't have an answer to. He still didn't have a perfect answer, but he understood, now, exactly what she'd meant. If you made it this far, you already know what this story was really about. It was never about the money. It was about a man who chose to be kind when there was nothing in it for him, and a woman who needed to know that people like that still existed. If this one got to you, let me know in the comments. And if you want more stories like it, subscribe, because there's another one coming soon.